can't let Alabama beat you twice. The Border Bowl is coming up. Tennessee and Kentucky. History says it's going to be all volunteers, but we know these games are never, ever easy, especially on the road. We're going to learn about Kentucky. Lance Dawe, Locked On Kentucky. That's coming up next right here on Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into a Thursday edition of Locked On Crossover. I'm Locked On Vols host Eric Cain with Locked On Kentucky host Lance Dawe, and Tennessee and Kentucky. Saturday, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. It's going to be in Lexington at Kroger Field, and the game will be televised on ESPN. It's the latest rendition of the Border Bowl, one of the oldest rivalry games in the SEC, but in the country as well. And Lance, it should be an exciting one. Both teams coming in with 5-2 records. Both teams are, 2-2 in Southeastern Conference play. And Kentucky coming off a bye week. Kind of what are the main, kind of what's your feel a little bit of Kentucky so far this season, Lance?
Well, I think right now Kentucky's kind of in a state of they've been punched in the gut after a really, really solid start to the season, albeit against pretty bad competition. You get a big win against Florida there at the tail end of it. Kentucky is just kind of fallen apart. And obviously you don't expect to go on the road and beat the number one team in the country and the Georgia Bulldogs. But the way that Kentucky has lost these last two games, I think has really not necessarily allowed portions of this fan base to kind of check out here. But it really does seem like the fan base is frustrated with the job that Mark Stoops and co have done. And he's responded in a couple of different ways through different outlets that he's appeared on, and he's given his take on, well, if you want more production, you're going to have to fork over more money, and everybody's got different opinions on that, and it's just kind of been a very tension-filled past couple of weeks, and that loss against Missouri last week, Eric, really, really put a damper on what people thought could potentially be a very good season this year, and right now with the way that this offense is playing, I don't really know if there are a lot of fans that are excited about the remainder of this schedule, because you and I were talking about it before we went on air here. Kentucky's got a pretty difficult slate to go, and ESPN's FPI predicts us to lose out. So right now, things not looking good, not looking positive, at least for the Kentucky Wildcats and their fan base.
Real quick sidebar, and I know this probably isn't fair to do on a crossover, but what were your take? What was your opinion on Mark Stoops kind of lobbying for NIL there in his coach's show after the Georgia loss?
I think that it's fair. I mean, I think it's the obvious thing to say is places like Georgia, they invest a lot of money in what they do. They invest a lot of money in recruiting and their staff and the things around that program, and that's kind of what's allowed them to be successful. It's at least one of the major aspects of it, and I think it's fair to say if you want more production, you're going to have to fork over more money, but I think Stoops is comfortable enough in this spot to know that's never going to happen. So he can just say whatever he kind of wants to about it, and nobody's ever going to really do anything. So I think that Stoops is right when he says it. It's not always great to be that blunt, but also at the same time, I think Stoops understands the fact that he coaches at the University of Kentucky, and you are never going to see any sort of major investment that could be comparable to a place like Alabama or Georgia or Ohio State or somewhere like that. You just simply are never going to see it. And so I think the coaching staff, in order to make this a successful program year in and year out, is going to have to recruit well as best they can and then slightly overachieve when it comes to breaking down individual matchups. So I think he's right. It's not always fun to be that blunt and be that just kind of harsh, especially on a local radio show. But you know what? Nobody's ever going to do anything about it. So I think he understands that.
Yeah, I'm sure no one's ever going to do anything about it. And for what it's worth, my opinion, again, not worth much to the Locked On Kentucky listeners. I get that. But I just I don't think it's a matter of is he right or wrong for saying it. I just think God, there's just time and a place, man. You get your brains beat in by Georgia. Georgia's a good football team. I get it. And it's 2 days later, you're lobbying for NIL.
And then you lose to Missouri. It's
yeah, exactly. To me, and I think Stoops is a good coach, but it's Georgia's got good coaches too. They got good players. Don't get me wrong, but Georgia's got good coaches too. I just thought the timing was a little weird. But anyway, back to this matchup. Now that I've pissed off all of your listeners, back to this matchup. For Tennessee, it's really a thing of, can you win on the road? Four of Tennessee's last 5 road games have been losses, dating back to November of 2022, dating back to going to Athens, Georgia, with 2 undefeated teams, fighting for a chance to go to Atlanta, going to Columbia, South Carolina. You won a game at Vanderbilt, and then this year going to the Swamp and then going to Alabama. And at least with Alabama last week, Tennessee, had control of the game, led 20-7 at halftime. Things were good. The environment was not much of a factor for them, where it was against Kentucky. And then there was just the second half collapse where officiating was horrible, but you didn't score a point in the second half. You got outscored 27-0. You're not going to win games doing that. So the thing is, can you win a game on the road? You've won a lot in Kentucky. You've won a lot over Kentucky historically in the series, but obviously Kentucky's in a different place with Mark Stoops in the last decade or whatever, and it's a really, really good football team. Really solid football team. Joe Milton, we'll talk about in a moment. He struggled this year. I thought he had a good game last week. Tennessee's improved on the the line of scrimmage, on the defensive line of the scrimmage, and all that. But in terms of kind of this matchup, I felt like for both of these programs, sitting at 5-2 records, if you want to achieve, neither one of these teams are going to Atlanta, in my opinion. If you want to achieve, a 9-win season and kind of some momentum going into the next year and feel good, because I picked Tennessee to be 9-3 this year.
Yeah.
So you got to win this game. You have to win this game. So there's kind of a lot in that regard. I kind of brought up Joe Milton a little bit. Tell me about Devin Leary. I was so high on Devin Leary. I thought he was going to be so great at Kentucky. To this point, it's not happened. He's not been the 2021 Devin Leary. What's been going on there?
He's been underperforming, and I think a lot of it has to do with this receiver room. On top of that, I think it's a combination of both. You can't really blame one heavily over the other. You look at his numbers so far this season, he's only completing 54% of his passes, which is something I don't think I would have said or predicted coming into this season, just based on his numbers when he was healthy at NC State. Something I did say, I think, at the beginning of the year, it's in his freshman year, we got to see him maybe take a little bit of a dip in terms of production. And that's fine because he was a freshman, but I really don't expect him to stoop to those levels again. And then he's back there at a place like Kentucky, where you would have expected all of these different positive things heading into the season to just kind of allow him to work out. You're bringing in an experienced transfer quarterback who's playing with one of what we thought was one of the best receiver rooms in the entire nation. We are also bringing back Liam Cohen, who was really good for Kentucky. It's what made Will Levis look good in that 2021 season, bringing him back at offensive coordinator. And then also you're bringing in a 1,000-yard rusher from another SEC team. So you would have expected all of these different things to combine to say Devin Leary's going to have a really good season for Kentucky to kind of close out his college career. And he has just simply not been on the same page as his receivers every single step of the way so far this season. He has underthrown balls. He has missed passes. He has just lacked communication with his receivers at times. It looks like whenever they're trying to execute downfield throws at times. He's also been a little bit more turnover prone than you would have expected. 7 interceptions to date, too, in the most recent loss to the Missouri Tigers. Only 120 yards passing in that game, by the way, 128 in the game prior to Georgia. Kentucky has just lost any semblance of a passing game here. And it's really, really interesting to say that, Eric, considering where we were a season ago with the fact that Kentucky couldn't run the ball at all. They were probably one of the worst rushing attacks in the SEC and the nation. And then all of a sudden now, the only thing that they can do is try and establish some semblance of a ground game with Ray Davis, while hoping on occasion Devin Leary is able to complete a pass or two to Berrien Brown or Dane Key. And these are not bad receivers, Tavion Robinson included. This is not a bad receiving core. I refuse to believe that. I'm not really sure what's going on. I've been saying that for weeks. I am just genuinely shocked at the fact that these guys have not put it together. And the worst part about it is I don't think the offensive line has been particularly bad either. That was a huge sticking point for us a season ago. That's why Kentucky couldn't run or throw the ball consistently. Now you've got the pieces and you've got the coaches, and they just have not been executing. And it's something that has really frustrated me, even through that first month of the season where you saw these really easy games for Kentucky almost kind of get away. Something that I keep going back to is like, man, this team can do something like beat the brakes off Florida, but they almost lost to EKU. Yeah. How do you have that floor and ceiling? And so that's just the concern here right now with Devin Leary is he's not shown consistency. I don't think in any of these games so far this season, especially not in these last 3 weeks. In fact, he's yet to eclipse 130 yards passing, like I mentioned. So just confused at the fact that Devin Leary is not worked out, I think is what I would say.
You mentioned that offensive line. You're exactly right. 2022 Kentucky, that offensive line gave up 42 sacks. That was second worst in the SEC. So far through 7 games, Kentucky's given up 11 sacks in 2023, so much improvement. Quickly, Joe Milton. I think the biggest thing for Kentucky listeners to understand, if you haven't watched a lot of Tennessee this year, Joe Milton is not Hendon Hooker. Well, no duh, right? Hendon Hooker was a Heisman finalist. You called it bad. In 2022, you said Hendon Hooker was going to be all SEC, and boy, you were spot on. Joe Milton is not Hendon Hooker. Hendon Hooker was elite. Joe Milton has potential. He has the tools and all that, but the consistency, the week after week, I talked about all offseason. Like that's what I want to see from Joe Milton, and we haven't seen that, so far this season. The game plan has changed. Throwing a lot of screens and a lot of lateral games, a lot of at or around the line of scrimmage, and not all that's Joe. You mentioned the receivers. Tennessee's receiver group is, and I thought it was going to be a strength coming into the season. So far, it's not really been a strength. Patchwork on the offensive line at times. Joe Milton's been off at times. It's the whole operation. Having said that, he against A&M, Tennessee played a near perfect game in every phase except throwing the football. Ran for 232 yards. Defense had just an incredible game, allowed 1 touchdown. Special teams had a score. Tennessee just couldn't throw the football. Then you go on the road to Alabama, and Joe Milton throws for 2 touchdowns, 175 yards in the first half, and is completing 75% of his passes. Like, who is this man? And so, that just kind of shows you what he's capable of. And what Tennessee did a really great job of last week is making him run the football, calling some design runs, and trying to get him into the flow of the game at 6'5", 235 pounds. And I thought he ran the football so well last week. So that's going to be an added factor for Brad White in that defense for Kentucky. It's going to be Leary against Joe Milton. But the real matchup is going to be Jalen Wright versus Ray Davis, and we'll hit on that here in just a second here on Locked On Vols and Locked On Kentucky for a Locked On crossover. Do want to say about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. The easiest and most exciting way to play DFS is just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more or less with a 2 to 6 player projection, and the winnings can roll in. I've never had more fun winning 25 times my money this football season. Again, just pick 2 or more players. They'll give you a projection. You just say more or less, and watch those winnings roll in. I encourage you to go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege today. And while you're there, use the promo code LockedOnCollege for your first deposit. They're going to give you an instant deposit match up to $100. What that means is if I put in 25, they're going to match me 25. I put in 75, they're going to match me 75, up to $100 at prizepicks.com. prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use that promo code LockedOnCollege. Again, that's at prizepicks.com. And another big shout out to our friends, LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire, it can feel like a high-stake wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have the right access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs finds the right people for you faster and for free. We all have tried to take a step in our career. We've all put our resume online at LinkedIn, hopes of getting a job interview or whatever. Maybe you are, where you want to be. Maybe you're a small business owner, but you need some help. You can't do it alone. You need somebody qualified, and you need somebody that you can trust. Well, LinkedIn Jobs has your back. You post your job online, simple tools like screening questions, make it easy to focus on people that you want to see that are qualified with the right skills that you can ultimately interview and then hire. It's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering qualified hires versus its leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster and for free. Post your job for free. That's at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Welcome back into a Locked On crossover Thursday. I'm Eric Cain with Locked On Vols, Lance Dawe with Locked On Kentucky. We talked a little quarterback. Underwhelming, I think, would be the appropriate word to talk about the quarterback matchup. I think the reason Joe Milton's not been as consistent and Devin Leary's not been, well, quite frankly, to this point, anything, is why the quarterback position in the SEC is kind of down. 2 big reasons why the quarterback position is kind of weak this year in the SEC. But underwhelming, I think, is fitting to describe that matchup. Let's talk about a matchup that everybody wants to talk about. Ray Davis, transfer from not Temple, Vanderbilt, and now he's at Kentucky. And then you got Jalen Wright, and the rest of the Tennessee run game was, kind of shut out there at Alabama last week. Need to get that going. Came into the game leading the SEC in rushing. Tell us about Ray Davis, man. Of course, we all know about that big game at Florida. What else has he done? He's leading the SEC in 13 total touchdowns. I didn't know he was this big of a threat out of the backfield as well.
Yeah, I said coming
as a receiver as well.
Yeah, coming into this season, I said about Ray Davis that I thought he was going to be a productive back. I just didn't know if he was going to be an first team all SEC elite type of guy, because I was excited about the fact that, we got to see him rush for 1,000 yards against Vanderbilt. That's pretty hard to do at that school. But I didn't necessarily know if it was going to translate to world beater over at Kentucky. I thought he was going to be able to get thought he was going to be able to establish himself statistically. I think that game against Florida has really allowed him to boost his numbers. And I'm not saying that he is not what he is. Obviously, he got those rushing yards for a reason. And you look at what he's doing in the receiving game as well, Eric. Almost 200 yards receiving and 5 touchdowns. He's had a receiving touchdown in 3 straight games, albeit against Florida, Georgia, and Missouri, where you've kind of struggled these last 2 weeks. So he's really come on here for the Kentucky Wildcats as one of the best running backs they've had over the past decade or so. And they've had some pretty good running backs here come in through the program. Only 3 games so far this season where he's eclipsed 100 yards rushing. Obviously, that 280 against Florida, again, has really boosted his numbers. Averaged 6.4 yards per carry and 128 yards on the ground against Missouri last weekend. So he's coming into this game playing pretty well overall this season, averaging 7 yards a carry and 8 touchdowns rushing to go with those 5 through receiving. He's been a very, very productive player. And we talked, Eric, at the beginning of the show about the disappointment with Devin Leary and the disappointment with this receiver room, about how they've just not really clicked. But Ray Davis has been probably the lone true bright spot on this team, at least on this side of the ball here, where you can point to him and say, okay, well, if the offense isn't going, at least Ray Davis is consistently week in and week out. So I've been very, very impressed with what Ray Davis has brought to the table so far this year. And I'm really intrigued to see what he does statistically with a larger SEC sample size, because up until this point, you've played Vanderbilt, Florida, and then the best team in the nation, and then you've Missouri, and he still was able to ball out in that game. So can he continue the streak of just dominating, I think, both on the ground and yards per carry sense? Can he continue to also pick things up in the receiving game? It's going to make him a very valuable NFL prospect, I'll tell you that, if he's able to continue to hold this up here. But Davis has been a very pleasant surprise in a year where the offense has been laying a lot of duds.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't have Davis right now, kind of where would you be? You'd be in trouble. And, I mean, the same could be said at points in times. For Jalen Wright for Tennessee, the thing about Tennessee's run game, it's not just Jalen Wright. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but, just looking at it on paper, and I've only watched parts of 2 games at Kentucky this year.
It's just Ray Davis.
Yeah, the run game is just Ray Davis. Now, for Tennessee, they'll play 3 guys. And all 3 of those guys deserving to play. You got Jalen Wright, who's the workhorse there. He's the first option. Jabari Small, who's been here a decade and does a great job, and he's capable back in this league. And then you'll have Dylan Sampson, who's a younger guy, who actually was the best of the 3 at Alabama last week. And he's kind of more of the home run hitter, but learning to run between the tackles and all that. And they'll try to throw him the football a little bit as well. But Jalen Wright leads it, man. And I mean, I want to say he's top 3, top 4 in the league in rushing at 593 yards, 91 carries, averaging 6.5 yards per carry. He's had such a good year, only 1 touchdown for Jalen Wright, whereas, again, 13 total for Ray Davis this year. But, Jalen Wright's good, man. He continues to, add some good weight each of the last couple of off seasons. He's explosive. He's got good vision. He runs really hard, and he's really, we heard about it all off season from guys over there on campus. Jay Wright's having a great off season. Jay Wright's having a great off season. And he actually practiced in fall camp this year where he didn't get an opportunity to because of injuries last year. And it's benefited him greatly. And he's coming on and having a strong start to his junior campaign. Again, he ran for 136 yards against Texas A&M that was averaging 84 yards on the ground a game.
Yep.
Entering that matchup. He ran for 123 yards against South Carolina. He's had a really, really strong start to his junior campaign. So Jalen Wright's going to be a good one. Jabari Small is going to get a whole lot of run, no pun intended, and of course Dylan Sampson. These defenses, though, as we flip the script a little bit, first I'll say about Tennessee's just quickly. I thought coming into the season for Tennessee. Offensively, you were going to take a step back. Defensively, you were going to take a step forward. And to this point, I mean, yeah, that's happened. Tennessee was outscored 27-0 in the second half at Alabama, but really it was 20-0 defensively because there was that scoop and score touchdown that Alabama got on defense. But overall, you have gotten after the passer. Tennessee's defensive line has been really, really good. One of the leaders in the SEC in sacks. Of course, James Pierce is up there individually with Braswell and Dallas Turner of Alabama. James Pierce is somebody you got to watch out for. Tyler Barron on the other side is somebody you have to watch out for. But also the internal push, the interior push of Amari Thomas, Bryson Eason, guys like that. The defensive line has been really good for Tennessee, and it's freed up that back end where the secondary was always the biggest question, and the secondary was the butt of all jokes last year. Guys like Kamal Haddon's played really good cornerback this year. Even Jalen McCullough, Wesley Walker at safety. They've been freed up to go and make more plays. And again, I love football because, again, it's all tied together, and the defensive line plays well, gets after the quarterback with 4 men, frees up the back end. So, Tennessee is taking a step defensively. This is going to be an in-the-box game. Run fits are going to be key. Safeties, cornerback setting the edge. Everybody's going to have to help out with Ray Davis because there's going to be tight ends, there's going to be H-backs, there's going to be some eye candy. It's going to be one of those in a phone booth type games, and I'm intrigued to see how well the guys in the secondary can help kind of stop that. But Tennessee's defense is taking a step with linebacker Aaron Beasley as well, kind of calling all the shots in the middle.
For Kentucky's defense, I think it's been a little bit of a disappointing year so far for Brad White and co. That was a unit that I thought was going to be fine heading into this season, and Kentucky certainly has been able to stop the run. I believe they're top 3 in the conference right now in rushing defense. Tennessee, by the way, top 5 in the SEC in rushing defense as well. So both Jalen Wright and Ray Davis are going to be put to the test in this matchup. But the thing about Kentucky that drives me insane, Eric, and this is probably one of the most infuriating aspects of football, the inability to get off the field on third down. It drives me nuts whenever a defense is not able to put it into a drive where they have worked for 3 downs or 2 downs, where you have really put the team in a position where, like, all right, it's 3rd and long. It's 3rd and 8. You should be able to get off the field. Oh, there's a crosser over the middle. Linebacker gets beat. 1st down. You barely get it, and then the drive continues. Kentucky has had that happen so many times this season against all sorts of opponents. Kentucky right now, if I'm not mistaken, is 13th in the SEC in opponent 3rd down conversion percentage, just above Vanderbilt. So you know what we're dealing with here. It's not been a phenomenal year for Kentucky. I believe they're in the bottom half of the SEC also in total defense statistically. And I think this really is partially a bit of a scheme issue, while also you point to maybe losing some really talented pieces that have gone on to the NFL at linebacker and at edge over the past couple of seasons. De'Aaron Jackson has been really solid. Maxwell Harrison's been really good as well. He has 5 interceptions on the season for Kentucky out of, I believe, their 11 total takeaways, which is something that they really struggled with a season ago. Trevin Wallace has kind of stepped in and been okay, I think, at times at linebacker. Kentucky's got some different pieces on this defense to where if you've been watching Kentucky football for quite some time, you recognize these names on this defense, but there's not been a whole lot of like phenomenal production, especially from this linebacker group. J.J. Weaver, who has been a really good player and person for the University of Kentucky for several seasons now. I believe he is currently 7th or 8th on the team in total tackles. He's just not been producing as much as you would expect him to at this point in the season. So Kentucky right now is dealing with a little bit of a personnel and coaching issue, and it's forced them to kind of be statistically worse than maybe where I would have pegged them to begin this year. So I think Kentucky is somewhat fine, but Tennessee can absolutely pick and choose their spots here in the passing game in this one. Final statistic here for you, Eric. Kentucky right now is 12th in the SEC in opponent completion percentage. And that's an area where, if I'm not mistaken, this Tennessee offense can be a little inconsistent with Joe Milton at the helm. So even though he is much better than where he was early on in his career. So that's an area that concerns me, Eric. That may be the place where I kind of pick and choose this game is Kentucky can't get off the field on 3rd down. Their secondary has been susceptible at different points to the intermediate to short passing game. If Joe Milton can show some consistency, then this game maybe wraps midway through the third quarter. It's genuinely the biggest concern for me.
Well, to give Kentucky some reasons to smile, I guess, or have some optimism, better phrase, Tennessee is so bad on fourth downs. It's incredible. Tennessee can't convert a fourth down. Tennessee entered the Alabama game 3 of 10, over 3 on fourth downs, 2 of which were on your own side of the 50 with a lead in hand. Cool. It's a story for another day. Actually, it's Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. You can already go back and listen to that at Locked On Balls. But anyway, yeah. In Tennessee, get this stat here. On 4th and 2 or shorter this season, Tennessee is 1 for 6, 0 for 5 the last 2 weeks. It's been bad, man. It's been really bad. So there's that. You got a cornerback and Maxwell Harrison, who's a freaking stud for Kentucky, 5 interceptions, team leading 44 tackles. I mean, how does that even happen at cornerback? Should be a good one. But again, like I said earlier, Joe Milton had a really good game last week. And so, if you can find some consistency there, then yeah, Tennessee can score some points. All right, we'll get final score predictions, keys to victory, all that and more coming up next as we finish off a Locked On crossover edition with Locked On Vols and Locked On Kentucky. Do you want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel? You can snap into the NFL season this year with America's #1 sports book. That is FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Again, $5 bet. You're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. All you need is a $5 bet. I've been thinking about joining FanDuel. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, I've been on FanDuel for a while. There's no better time to get in on all that action because with this NFL season, you can check out the spreads, you can check out the totals, those overs, those unders. But if you're new and thinking about joining FanDuel, I encourage you to check out those player props, individual receptions over under 3 in the hook, maybe passing touchdowns over under 2.5. Maybe receiving yards over under 45, whatever the case is, those are fun and something easy to pay attention to throughout the football game. So you can get those player prop spreads, totals, and more. That's at FanDuel Sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. One more time, FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. Been a fun day on Locked On Crossover, Locked On Vols. I'm Eric Cain, Locked On Kentucky. That's Lance Dawe. We've been discussing the quarterbacks, the defense, the running back matchup. 2 of the better running backs in the SEC, and so it's going to be fun to watch that happen at Kroger Field on Saturday. Let's get into keys to victory. Tennessee is a 3.5-point favorite on the road. The total's at 51.5. We'll do score predictions and all that here in a moment. But Lance, if Kentucky's going to pull off the upset at home, what needs to happen for Kentucky?
Yeah, Devin Leary's got to actually do something in this game. I don't know if you know that meme where the guy's just kind of like poking at the rock and it's just like, come on, do something.
One of my favorites.
At some point, I'm going to tweet out Devin Leary's face on that rock and just be like, all right, dude, you got to find a way to get it done through the air. And I think part of that has to do with this receiving core stepping up. Again, I don't think this receiving core lacks for talent. I certainly don't think Liam Cohen is out here lacking whenever it comes to scheme. It's just simply comes down to the execution. Run your routes, run them correctly, catch the passes. That's also been a huge sticking point that we didn't even talk about. I believe Devin Leary actually leads the SEC in drop percentage, and then therefore the yards that would have been collected had those passes been caught. So Kentucky's got a lot of work to do in their passing game, and I don't necessarily know if they're going to figure it out considering we're heading into our 8th game of the season. But if Kentucky's going to pull off this upset, I think that's the first thing we got to start with outside of maybe a defensive takeaway here. Devin Leary has to be better because you may not be able to rely on Ray Davis running the football. Like we mentioned, both these teams pretty good at stopping the run. So if you are going to move the ball and score in this game, you got to be able to get your quarterback going. And it's just so frustrating at this point that you haven't been able to, considering the situation. No one's hurt. Everything's fine. You just have to go out and execute.
Offensive lineman Kenneth Horsey, he was back last game, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, he missed a lot. He came into the season with 33 straight starts, played the opener, and then missed 5 straight games. I think that's big for the offensive line that we've already mentioned for Kentucky that's most improved. When I look at this game, it's pretty much just straight at you, right? Like it's in your face, like from a Tennessee perspective. You don't have a quarterback that's really dynamic on the other side. And again, anybody that listens to Locked On Vols in the offseason talking about what's going to happen this season knows that I thought Devin Leary was going to be a stud. I mean, 2021, Devin Leary is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. I mean, he really was. 35 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, dealt with an injury last year. Even before that injury, he was pretty good. And then so far this year, it just hasn't clicked. Now, Tennessee fans are saying, well, this Saturday it's going to click, right? We'll see what happens. Hopefully not, right? But when I look at this matchup, like, nothing is too dynamic. It's just kind of like straight at you. So for Tennessee, you just be who you are. Do what you do at a high level. I know that's coach speak. Run the football. Get back to running the football. Couldn't run the football in a traditional sense last year at Alabama. Run the football. Get your tempo. Get going the speed that you want to, and then let Joe Milton build off that. Because if you get the Joe Milton that was there in the first 2 quarters against Alabama, man, that's a really, really good Joe Milton that can win you a whole lot of football games. But you got to get Jay Wright going. You got to get this run game going, and you got to get that tempo going as well. Something with Tennessee, Kentucky the last couple of years, Tennessee has scored on explosive plays, a lot of explosive plays. You haven't seen Tennessee really drive and sustain long drives against Kentucky. It's going to be a challenge this year because that's who Tennessee is offensively. And then when you do that, you've got to finish. Tennessee just couldn't finish in the red zone last week. 1 for 4 in terms of scoring touchdowns in the red zone at Alabama, and you are not going to beat good teams on the road in this league without finishing in the red zone. So be who you are offensively. Run the football. Let Joe Milton build off that. Finish in the red zone. And, I think that if you score and you do what you're capable of, I'm not sure Kentucky on the other end is built to come from behind as well as some other teams on Tennessee's schedule. Defensively, you got to have your run fits. I mean, you got to play inside out. I think gap integrity up front is going to be huge this week for Ray Davis. He's quick enough. His vision is good enough to see those creases, shoot through those creases, and be off to the races. I wouldn't say he's a dynamic speedster. Obviously, he's fast enough, but he's about 220 pounds at 5'10". He's a load. You got to hang on and wait for some help to get there. But play inside out at linebacker, gap integrity on the defensive line. Run fits are going to be key for the corners to set the edge and for the safeties to come up and help. Again, just kind of be who you are and see what happens. Final score predictions. Lance Dawe, what do you think is going to happen Tennessee and Kentucky on Saturday at Kroger Field?
Yeah, like you said, I think for Kentucky, the big thing here is just making sure that Joe Milton doesn't get into a rhythm, getting off the field on 3rd down, and then allowing your own passing game to actually go out there and execute for once this season. I think that right now I'm leaning towards Tennessee in this one. I just don't feel comfortable taking the Wildcats at home with the way that they're trending at the moment for Mark Stoops to make the comments that he has over the past couple of weeks after getting absolutely destroyed in Athens, and then frankly getting your head beat in at home against Missouri, who is a good team, somebody I did not expect to be very good this season.
Same.
Now you're at home against the Volunteers, and it's a team that's just mollywopped you, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, a season ago. So I'm going to take the Vols in this one. I'm going to go 30-24. I think Kentucky scores late to make this one close. I think the Vols do cover the spread there, but I think that at the end of the day, Kentucky's not able to do consistently what we want them to do, which is try and get off the field more often. I don't know if Kentucky's going to be creating a ton of turnovers in this one. I think Tennessee's going to end up being the team that shows that they have a little bit better of an identity on that side of the ball, and then therefore they're able to establish it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the game where Tennessee could be up multiple scores, but like you said, I think Kentucky could score late, make the final score look a little bit closer. I think Tennessee covers the 3.5 and Tennessee wins. But for some reason, I mean, every time it's like when this game's in Knoxville, it can be noon, it could be 3:30, it could be or 4 o'clock SEC Network, it could be a night game. When this game is in Lexington, it's always at night. It's always cold. It's not going to be as cold this week, but it's always cold, and they're always close. And it's a matter of this play or that play. I remember in 2021, man, Will Levis, he was certainly not Will Levis in 2022, but he really hadn't gotten going at that point. And then in the first half, threw it 29 times. Will Levis was incredible in the first half against Tennessee back in 2021. It's those types of games where somebody steps up, makes a play, and it comes down to the nitty gritty. But I just think I like Tennessee in this matchup. I think Tennessee it matches up so well against Kentucky. And if you be who you are and run the football and really stop the run, then I think Tennessee can win by multiple scores. So I'll say 35-21, but wouldn't be shocked if it's closer than that.
I've got two things here for you, Eric. First of
Okay.
all, if this was basketball season, we'd be having a significantly different conversation. Thankfully, that's almost here for us, and I'm very excited about that. The second thing, you might have seen this, and this was a tweet from our friend Chris Marler. He had a fun fact about Josh Heupel and what Tennessee does coming off of losses. Underneath Heupel, Tennessee is 7-1 coming off a loss, and they average 51.8 points per game in those 8 games and have a margin of 38.3 in those 7 contests as well. So Tennessee, after catching a loss, they normally rebound pretty strongly. So we'll see what happens this weekend.
It's a good way to end it if you're a Vol fan listening to this crossover edition for sure. 7-1 and scoring an average of 50 points. So, we'll see what happens. Again, it's always close on the road with Tennessee and Kentucky. So, not expecting anything different. So it should be a great environment at Kroger Field, and we'll see who comes out on top. That is Lance Dawe for Locked On Kentucky. I am Eric Cain for Locked On Vols. You Kentucky fans, if you want to get a Vols perspective before the game, come listen to Locked On Vols. Same with Tennessee fans. You want a Kentucky perspective, go listen to Lance Dawe here on a Friday and Saturday before the game. You have plenty of time to get all the preparation you need for Tennessee and Kentucky. That game's going to be at 7 o'clock on ESPN, and we will both be recapping it all for postcast. And, of course, as the weekend goes on into Monday, we'll recap it from every single angle. Appreciate you guys for listening and watching to this Locked On crossover edition with Locked On Vols and Locked On Kentucky.